Well, you certainly had to think that there was a chance that Tennessee would show up flat, no matter how optimistic you were after South Carolina destroyed the Vols last week in what was thought to be a college football playoff killer, Heisman campaign killer, and the latter will be true. But suddenly, with the way things have shaken out, who knows what could happen? Caleb Calhoun is with me. I'm Dave Hooker. So thanks for jumping on as Tennessee absolutely destroys Vanderbilt. And it was really never in doubt this football game was somehow controlled on the line of scrimmage by Tennessee's offensive line, despite having about 15 injuries, Caleb. And defensively, the Vols stepped up. I know this is a lesser opponent, but I believe it would have been really easy to chuck in the towel after the South Carolina game. Tennessee did not do that. I'm very, very impressed by the way they handled this game.
I am too. I think the opening drive really set a tone. To come in and score a touchdown on the opening drive like that. There's a lot we can nitpick about Joe Milton, and I think we will probably later in this post because there are some concerns with him. But to have him take that shot to Jalen Hyatt, for them to score there, then to get a stop, and then 2 drives later, Princeton Fant fighting really hard for that touchdown. Very impressive. And let's keep in mind, in terms of morale, you couldn't have a wider gap in morale coming into this game between Tennessee and Vanderbilt. Tennessee threw everything away last week, everything they were hoping for. Vanderbilt, on the other hand, comes in. Remember, they start this season thinking we just want to get an SEC win, maybe win 3 or 4 games. They come into this one on a 2-game winning streak, saying, "Oh my gosh, we might go to a bowl game if we win this." And I mean, a massive gap in morale, and Tennessee just a little bit sloppy in the first half, but really put it on them. And you're right, you have to give them a lot of credit. We were dumbfounded last week by it, but let's be honest, after what we saw against Clemson today, Spencer Rattler really did just turn a corner, and Tennessee just happened to be the unfortunate team that he first turned the corner against. That seems like that's the truth at this point. Rattler really did just turn a.
No, I think you're totally right on that. And I will say this too, that when it comes to Tennessee and the way they played last week, I think there are a lot of factors at play. We've talked about the off the field factors, and there was an altercation that occurred between Jeremy Banks and Hendon Hooker, but to be able to put that behind you with so much seemingly lost, and I want to get to what happened today because Caleb had pointed out early in the week there was still a weird sort of way that Tennessee could manage itself back into the conversation for the college football playoff. And in fact, with what happened today, they very well could be. I'm not saying they'll be in. I'm not saying they're a favorite. I'm not saying I would bet on it because I wouldn't. But I want to get to that. But you're absolutely right. I mean, this team had every reason to fall apart and fumble its way through the last game. They did not do that, Caleb. They did not. I was impressed. I want to get your thoughts on the message board. Great team win. I agree wholeheartedly. Caleb, what stood out to you? And we'll start to break it down a little bit more as far as what needs to happen for Tennessee to be in that college football playoff talk.
Standing up from the game is just, I think it's pretty obvious. It's the running game. I mean, Jabari Small, Jalen Wright, Dylan Sampson. And, we talked about the 4 offensive linemen being out, but a lot of those touchdowns it was just, they get into the second level, the linebackers, and they made one cut and they were home free for a touchdown every time. And that's just what it seemed like. I will say on the negative side, the thing that stood out is we have to, Joe Milton's issues from the start of last year don't look any better now. I mean, it's hard for me to say because I'm one of those. I really like the guy. I think he's a good dude. I think similar to Hendon Hooker. I think they're both really good guys, him and Hendon Hooker. So I don't like to pile on to Joe Milton, but not just the overthrows. You can live with those because Hendon Hooker overthrew a lot of deep balls a lot of times. But there was one where he kept the play alive with his feet and rolled out, and he had Squirrel White wide open. I mean, he just threw a 500-mile-an-hour fastball into his hands. And if you just lob that, it's an easy catch. And, just little things like that. It's still a huge problem. And it goes back to what we and you talked about, the cannon for the arm's a little bit irrelevant. It's actually in sports, if you have a cannon for an arm, go into pitching more than playing quarterback.
Yeah, and usually people say that about somebody, and there's very few quarterbacks that you've said just cannon for an arm, and you meant an all-around great passer. I mean that
Yeah.
is not usually the case. So, listen, I think that Tennessee at this point with Joe Milton probably can't, even if they make the college football playoff. That's what I want to dive into. Probably can't win it. I don't know that they could have won it anyway with Hendon Hooker, but just to be back in that conversation, let's talk about what happened today. Okay, so first of all, I think the thing that had to happen, and this really wasn't even in the forefront of my mind. I know, Caleb, you had mentioned it and written about it early in the week, but I didn't.
I don't know what that is.
Yeah, that's apparently ESPN.com is going a little bit crazy on me. Sorry about that. We're just breakdancing a little bit. But Caleb, I don't think that I didn't think there was any possibility that Tennessee could get back in the hunt. But it started with the Ohio State Michigan game. Not only that one team won, but one team lost handedly. And that was Ohio State. And boy, it just hurts to think about Hendon Hooker probably wins the Heisman Trophy if he doesn't get hurt and they don't have the collapse last week. But nevertheless, one team loses handily, so that you would think take them out of the running. Now, I know Ohio State's already arguing they should still be in a 14 playoff, and they can say that. But from Tennessee's perspective, it's not even a conversation. I don't believe if that game's close. Instead, Michigan played really well. Your thoughts on that? And if you want to lead us into some other games you think might have cracked the door open slightly for Tennessee.
Yeah, I think there was that. There was also kind of obviously the Clemson South Carolina game was huge. South Carolina beat the brakes off. I'm sorry, no, they didn't beat the brakes off Clemson. They beat Clemson. I was thinking Tennessee for a minute. They beat the brakes off Tennessee. But South Carolina did beat Clemson, but that's twofold, them beating Clemson. Knocks Clemson out. Also doesn't make that Tennessee loss to South Carolina look so bad. Still looks bad because of how Tennessee lost. But Tennessee is going to jump Clemson. They are going to jump. They're going to jump Oregon, who lost to Oregon State. So Oregon has 3 losses. That puts them at number 8 in the college football playoff ranking. They're going to jump LSU, which puts them at number 7. And then you're questioning can they jump Michigan to get them to number 6? And then can they jump Alabama? And here's where things are going to get tricky. Sorry, Vol Nation. I know everybody's going to be upset. Tennessee beat Alabama. They should be ahead. The committee's going to look at the fact that Tennessee beat Alabama by 3 at home. Alabama's 2 losses are by 3 to Tennessee on the road and in overtime at LSU by 1. Those aren't bad losses. Tennessee has one great loss to Georgia, and then they got blown out by South Carolina. I don't know anybody who is rational who thinks that Alabama, I don't care if you play them in Columbia, neutral field, Tuscaloosa, I don't care where you play them. No rational person thinks Alabama would lose 63-38 to South Carolina.
No, I don't either. But the head-to-head should trump all that.
I mean,
I thought about that during the game, and I thought about the argument for Alabama. And let's be clear, the college football playoff is supposed to be different from the AP poll, where you had to climb up and you had to do that sort of thing. And I get that. Please, we want you to subscribe, hit that like button right now so we can get more people on board. Let's be really clear. The college football playoff is not supposed to be like the AP poll, where you have to jump people and climb people, but it is a little bit. We have a recency reaction, and I think that that's what happened with Tennessee at South Carolina. I still look at Tennessee even compared to Alabama, and I agree. We can talk about good wins, bad wins, good losses, bad losses, but at the end of the day, Caleb, it's an easy head-to-head matchup. I mean, if I'm a Tennessee fan or a college football analyst, as we are, I'm upset. I don't care who it is. If they have the same record and they get left out and they won head-to-head. I understand your argument, and people may agree with you. Daniel said Clemson ahead of Tennessee. I say yes. Yes, Daniel, we both think Tennessee jumps Clemson. No doubt. We're talking about Alabama right now. So, but Caleb, your argument would be that the entire resume would be better for Alabama, is what you're saying, right?
I mean, I'll acknowledge it's still hard for me to say that because you're right. There is the head-to-head, and Tennessee had, and also Tennessee blowing out. My argument is, having watched a lot Alabama all year and having watched Tennessee all year, I think I could objectively say I think on a neutral field I'd probably favor Alabama to win, and I would say they're the better team. I get it. Here comes the question with the college football playoff, and this is why it's all murky. Are they supposed to do body of work, or are they supposed to do who they think the best four teams are? Because those are never the two same things. And this is why college football has been tasked with given an impossible task. They never should have sold this. And this was the problem with the BCS. However, you want to do a postseason, you should never come out and say this postseason is about getting the best teams in there, because you're never going to be able to always just settled on the field always doesn't determine the best teams. And football's not a science like that. And so I think I get your point with head to head. I think the hard thing with Tennessee also, and again, Alabama lost to them, so it hurts Alabama too, is that LSU win doesn't look as good anymore. Texas A&M just went and beat the brakes off LSU.
Yeah, but again, if you want to get, the last thing I figure in is comparative scoring. Okay, so I mean, we could start to play that game all day long, but ultimately, Tennessee did beat LSU handily, and LSU beat Alabama.
Yes.
So again, I think that would speak to Tennessee's ability to get into a college football playoff. I just Jackie said this season Vols beat Bama. No way they should be ranked ahead of Tennessee. I think I'm not a homer guy, Caleb, but I would agree with that. And it sounds like you may not, and I respect that. But
no, I agree with it. I'm talking about what's the committee tasked with. What's their job? I mean, yes, I think Tennessee should be ranked ahead of Alabama, but that's not necessarily how the committee is tasked with handling this, or how they claim they're tasked with it. But again, there's still the trick. Like, I mean, look, I think Tennessee now. I think Tennessee should be ahead of Michigan, of Ohio State. Excuse me. Ohio State didn't just lose; they lost. They didn't just lose badly, by the way. They lost at home. They lost at home to Michigan like that, and
no,
in their own. Yeah, and their only quality win right now is over Penn State, which, by the way, you want to talk about teams like making a push. Penn State's going to sit up there and say we've probably got the two best losses of anybody between Ohio State and Michigan, if among two lost teams. It just gets real murky. We know this. The committee is really praying that USC and TCU win out. They're desperately praying that those two, because then it's a path of least resistance.
Right, I agree with that. And I think TCU is going to be in. I'm a believer in TCU. I didn't know much about them in September. I'm not gonna lie, but I've watched them a lot since. I think they win the Big 12 championship game. I think Tennessee's best hope is Southern Cal losing in the Pac-12 championship game. So.
Mm-hmm.
They beat Notre Dame 38-27. Notre Dame ain't that great, but it's still a double-digit win. And we'll see with Southern Cal if they can hold serve in their championship game. If Southern Cal wins the Pac-12, they're in, because one of the stipulations is conference championships. So I believe that
and they have a better record.
Yeah, and they have a better record. So there's no way that Tennessee would leapfrog them there. But if they lose, Tennessee, just to be straight up with you, Tennessee fans, please hit that like button so we get more people on board. We appreciate that. And subscribe if you haven't to this point. But even if Southern Cal loses, let's not forget this, they would still have 2 losses, just like Tennessee. So they could still make it. And I will say this. I think if you had a coin flip it, and those are the two teams that are 4 and 5, I think the LA market and the television market would play somewhat into it.
I mean, but I don't.
It shouldn't. But.
It shouldn't. And also, this is where college sports is so different from pro sports. Is we know that TV market size doesn't necessarily doesn't translate to viewership. If with college sports.
True.
And so that's a little bit unique. By the way, um, Utah, I think, is going to play USC for the Pac-12 championship, and they have already beaten USC this year.
Yes.
So that makes this really interesting, guys. Because yes, if Utah beats USC, I'm with you. Like, if there was ever a case to not have conference championship games, by the way, they've been rendered. There's 3 conference championship games that are going to be irrelevant next week.
Right.
Michigan and Georgia lose, they're still going, and the teams that beat them are not going. It doesn't matter. And so, and you may end up seeing that case made for TCU too. I mean, if TCU loses their conference championship game, they have one loss, not as clear as Michigan and Georgia, but they still only have one loss. They still might find themselves in the playoff, or that might get Ohio State in. I don't know, but
Ohio State's done for the year. So as far as playing any more football, regular season football games or championship games, so there's really
I know. I'm saying Ohio State may get lucky and leapfrog, and if TCU loses the Big 12 title game, they might value record over anything else.
Well, they might also value a bigger fan base.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Again, shouldn't be a factor, but is. But so let's be real clear. I think there is about a 10% chance of Tennessee making the college football playoff. And I don't care if they're ranked number 1 on Tuesday night. That's a television show, okay? But what ultimately matters is the last ranking. I think Tennessee has about a 10% chance. So I'm not trying to oversell people on this that it could happen, but it could happen. And things played into Tennessee's favor today. So if you were to give it a percentage chance of Tennessee making the college football playoff,
I'm going to go less than 10. I'm going to go 5. And I wrote things out this week. And the reason is I know they should, and I get the point. I just don't see the committee leapfrogging Tennessee over Alabama because neither team did anything to change their positioning after today. And so I can't look at that and say, I know in the past they've had teams leapfrog other teams and things like that, but the most notable example was, it's funny because it might come down to these two again, was 2014 when Ohio State leapfrogged TCU to get into the playoff. But what everybody forgot was that Ohio State did play a Big Ten championship game and won 59-0, and that was the Big 12's fault for not having a championship game that year.
Yeah.
And so Tennessee and Alabama are not. Tennessee, Alabama, and Ohio State, none of them are playing a regular season game the rest of them, and none of them are playing a conference championship game. So, I mean, a part of me is like, okay, wherever you see them on Tuesday, you saw Tennessee and Alabama where they were last week. It's really hard for me to say the committee is going to sit there and change their mind on where they stand now, even if you think they should be above Alabama. Now, crazy scenario is what happens if TCU loses and USC loses next week, and you get a 3/4 of the playoff is the SEC with two loss SEC teams in Tennessee and Alabama.
I don't think that'll happen. I think you're pushing it to get 2 right now.
Imagine the riots in the college football world.
Yeah. So Tennessee Smokey says Georgia will be number 1. Daniel, come on, Ohio State's not going to be number 1. That whole the game thing has to go away, just for the record.
It's the Ohio State though.
I know. That is really annoying. That's one of the things that bothers me. And I think moving forward, you'll see that game not get nearly as much hype. I think you're already seeing that because of the upcoming television contracts now. So, because it didn't get as hyped on ESPN as it has in previous years. I can remember one year I thought that was all they covered, even turned on the NFL to just cover the Ohio State game. So Tennessee Smokey has Georgia number 1, Michigan number 2, TCU number 3. I can roll with that, and I would go Southern Cal number 4.
Yep. And so the question becomes, so they're obviously going to jump Clemson and LSU and Oregon. Tennessee is definitely going to be no lower than number 7 in next week's playoff rankings. The question is there a path for them to get from 7 to 4?
Well, and at the end of the day, I think that
and they may give Ohio State. I'm still not sure.
And for those that are just tuning in, see, Tennessee Smokey thinks that Alabama will be ahead of Southern California. I don't get that. I don't understand.
I don't think that's not happening.
Yeah. So Danny says, "Oh boy, here we go again. Go get a bowl, and next year will be better with no questions." Okay, so that may be the case, but we can talk about a rebuilt offensive line and a new quarterback next year. But if you're just tuning in, I do want to repeat what we said earlier. Major kudos to this football team because I thought there was about a 50-50 chance that they would show up with no spunk, and they had plenty of spunk, and I was very impressed. And I would, it's not a lot more I can say than that. I mean, kudos to this group. It's certainly a special group, Caleb.
It is. It is. I mean, you're right. Major props. They have been more mature than most. We talked about it last week. Last week was an example of this was not a team that could afford to have one of those letdowns where they're just not fully dialed in, which the defensive line did have one of those last week. Every team in the history of college football has had about 2 or 3, 4 games like that a year. Even every championship team does. Last week was the first time Tennessee had that all year. And, and then to respond the way they did this week, you got to give credit. It does speak to their maturity. It speaks to, for all the issues Joe Milton had, I will say he's such a good dude. I think intangibles matter, and I think that players wanted to play for him at
I
quarterback.
agree. I agree.
You can't dismiss that.
All right, so be sure to like this, turn your notifications on because we'll visit with Cooper Mays and Jacob Warren. We're pretty sure tomorrow. That's the plan, but both of them got banged up, so obviously their health comes first. But you want to turn your notifications on so that this video and the videos tomorrow with Cooper and Jacob reach you, and we're always on board at 8:30 weekdays. Hope everyone had a very fantastic Thanksgiving. I know I did. It's been a heck of a run, and this team, I'm sure, just cemented themselves in a very, very good bowl game at the very least when they could have stumbled around and not done so. So kudos to the Vols. Have a fantastic evening, everyone. This has been a presentation of Off the Hook Sports.